Everyone had been waiting to see how Trump would respond to Bloomberg's leak. Those recordings of Witkoff, Ushakov, and Dmitriev, the people who were supposed to be navigating some of the most sensitive negotiations between the United States and Russia. And when the moment finally came, his answer, delivered casually aboard a plane on the way to Florida, was almost surreal. Reporters pressed him, asking what he made of the whole thing, and all he said was, "I didn't hear it." And then, as if switching into familiar territory, he gave that trademark explanation of his. This is just how high-stakes politics works. He needs to sell Ukraine to Russia.
He's got to sell this to Ukraine. He's got to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's what a deal maker does. You got to say, look.
Not in the monetary sense, but in the way deal makers frame leverage. Convince one side, reassure another. Make them believe the offer is their best possible outcome. A classic negotiation posture, according to him, nothing more, nothing less. But of course, the bigger picture is far stranger. Under normal circumstances, after a scandal of this magnitude, Witkoff would have been removed immediately. Yet Trump continues to rely on him, which only deepens the oddity of the entire situation, because from the start, the framework made little sense. Discussions involving Gaza, the broader Middle East, and the war in Ukraine, all extraordinarily complex geopolitical arenas, were placed in the hands of someone who is not a diplomat, not a trained negotiator, not even a political figure with institutional experience. He appeared almost out of nowhere, brought in solely because Trump trusts him personally. And while loyalty may be a virtue in business, in geopolitics, it creates the perfect conditions for manipulation. And the Russians, in this case, seem to have taken full advantage. The leak only crystallizes what many already suspected, that Witkoff was being steered, nudged, guided into positions favorable to Moscow, often without realizing how expertly the game was being played around him. After the uproar, the so-called Ukraine plan was quietly edited down, from 28 points to 19, and for the first time, the plan begins with the word ceasefire. A small shift on paper, but a clear signal that the diplomatic field has suddenly become far more active. Still, anyone watching this closely understands, activity does not mean progress, and momentum does not guarantee results. Not in this conflict, not in its current form. So let's break down what all of this actually means, and where it may be leading next. Before we begin, a quick note. I don't show my face, and the voice you're hearing is altered, not for drama, but for safety. Let's just say that when you spend enough time around certain intelligence circles, you learn that anonymity is a form of armor. This channel isn't funded by governments, organizations, or donors. There are no sponsors behind me, no outside agenda. It exists solely for one purpose, to give you clear, unfiltered analysis of what's actually happening behind the headlines. Who I am doesn't matter. The information does. So let's get into today's brief. Now, before we move on, let's break down something that almost slipped under the radar: the quiet resumption of U.S.-Russia back-channel talks in Abu Dhabi. The Russian delegation arrived first, and Washington decided to answer by sending someone who, at first sight, doesn't fit the profile at all: Dan Driscoll. And here is where things get interesting. Driscoll isn't a career diplomat. He isn't a strategist. He isn't even a professional negotiator. He's essentially the personal confidant of the vice president. And what makes the story stranger is how closely his biography overlaps with Vance's. Two men from the American interior, same university, similar military paths, one in the Army, one in the Marine Corps, both eventually shifting into business, and only later discovering politics. Driscoll now holds the formal title of Secretary of the Army. though in American structure it's more of a logistical command role, not a political one. In simple terms, he's the person responsible for the army's internal infrastructure, not foreign policy. And yet he was placed at the center of a negotiation track involving Gaza, the broader Middle East, and the war in Ukraine, arguably one of the most complex geopolitical knots on the planet. And this is exactly the problem. People without deep experience in diplomacy or intelligence often don't recognize when they're being guided, framed, or outright manipulated. And the Russian side has a long institutional tradition of spotting that weakness instantly. And judging by what leaked, that is exactly what happened. The Russians had a 28-point proposal, badly translated into English, full of clumsy phrasing and errors that no native speaker would ever use. They needed someone naive enough to take it seriously. And they found their man. Driscoll pushed it to Witkoff. Witkoff pushed it to Trump, and the magic words were spoken. Moscow is ready to sign. That single sentence is what turned the whole document from an amateurish draft into something Washington suddenly had to treat as if it were real. It created urgency. It created pressure. And by the time anyone actually read it line by line, the damage was already done. What happened next was predictable. Europe froze. Ukraine reacted with shock. Even inside Trump's own circle, people were asking, what did we just walk into? Eventually, Trump read the plan carefully and realized how absurd it was, which is why European partners stepped in and rewrote the entire structure, reducing 28 points down to 19. Some clauses disappeared completely. Forced reductions of the Ukrainian army, blanket amnesties for war criminals, and the idea of using frozen Russian assets as bargaining chips. The most important detail, though, was the first line: immediate ceasefire. That alone made the new version look less like a reward for the aggressor, but it still doesn't resolve the core issue. Any proposal that treats occupied territory as negotiable is, by definition, an incentive for future wars. And any plan that pretends both sides share responsibility ignores the fundamental reality. One side invaded. The other is trying to survive. And this is why, despite the diplomatic noise, no major breakthrough should be expected anytime soon. Everyone at the table is speaking, but no one is actually ready to concede anything meaningful. Before we continue, let me remind you, if you find this kind of analysis valuable, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel survive. This project has no sponsors, no donors, no political patrons. It exists only because you watch it. Now, the part that's quietly blowing up behind the scenes. Russia's reaction to the leaked recordings was exactly what you would expect. It's fake. But here is the interesting detail nobody is talking about. How were these calls even intercepted? Based on what has already leaked, the conversations between Witkoff, Dmitriev, and Ushakov weren't happening over Telegram, WhatsApp, or any encrypted platforms. They were using regular phone lines, the easiest thing in the world for any intelligence service to tap. Someone recorded them, packaged the audio, and leaked it. The real question is, who did it? Was it the Americans, with their enormous surveillance capabilities? Or was it someone inside Russia trying to sabotage negotiations in order to prevent any hint of ending the war? Because, make no mistake, there are two factions inside Moscow. One is quietly desperate to freeze the conflict and regroup. The other, the war party, wants escalation at any cost. And suddenly, Igor Strelkov, sitting in detention, starts publishing furious commentaries again. This alone tells you the internal struggle is real. Meanwhile, Moscow insists it hasn't received the new, shortened 19-point plan. Ushakov publicly said that the draft handed to them requires revision, modification, further detailed discussions. According to him, new clauses appeared: control of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, a full prisoner exchange, and several operational points both sides would need to resolve before addressing any territorial questions. Again, notice the pattern. Territorial issues are pushed out of the initial stage, something even Russia, at least rhetorically, is entertaining for now. But here's the core truth that every policymaker in Washington, Brussels, or Kyiv understands, or should understand. Any serious peace plan must begin with one single line: immediate ceasefire. This is why the European version instantly looks more realistic than the 28-point Frankenstein drafted in Moscow. Everything else, the money, the reparations, the frozen assets, the sanctions, all of that is garnish. The main dish is the ceasefire. Without it, there is no plan, only an illusion of a plan. And yes, the infamous clause, 50% of profits go to the Americans, has reportedly been removed. Because even for geopolitics, that level of cynicism was too grotesque to survive. But here's the part the Kremlin absolutely cannot accept. Their number one red line is control over the Donetsk region. In any form, under any label, lease, temporary arrangement, special status, pick your euphemism. Look at it through the eyes of hardline Russian nationalists. A territory they wrote directly into their constitution, leased back from Ukraine? It's absurd even inside their own narrative. For Kyiv, it's even more absurd. You don't lease your own territory to the very state that invaded you. This entire situation is such a dead end that one of my colleagues fed the whole thing into ChatGPT just to see how AI would propose a peace plan. Ironically, the AI version looked more reasonable than the real one drafted in Moscow. And while all this political theater is unfolding, something else is happening far away, yet directly connected. Trump had a conversation with Xi Jinping. Reportedly, Trump tried to get Xi to pressure Putin into accepting at least the European plan. Xi responded by steering the conversation straight to Taiwan, calling it an inseparable part of China, and, here are his exact words, an integral component of the post-war world order. Post-war. That phrase alone should make you pause. Post-war what? Post-war Ukraine? Post-war global conflict? Some sort of new grand bargain. You take Ukraine, we take Taiwan? The idea is chilling, because it suggests that China may be offering a geopolitical trade. You allow us to swallow Taiwan, and we help you wrap up Ukraine. And this kind of talk is a sign of a world entering dangerous turbulence. Not theoretical, real. Whether Trump agreed, disagreed, or sidestepped, we don't know. But the fact the conversation even took this direction means the global chessboard is shifting in ways the public barely sees. And that's why we track this story so closely. Not because each new plan is viable, but because each failed plan reveals who is trying to reshape the world, and how. As for the European 19-point draft, it is still more coherent than the original. But Ukraine will not accept any plan that rewards aggression. Nor should it. Ending the war must begin with a ceasefire. Everything else is secondary. Thank you for watching. Your support truly matters. And we'll continue following every thread of this increasingly unstable moment in world politics.